Hey guys, in the past I've spoke about police brutality, and my points were proven, and I'll get into that in a couple minutes here. Um, but first off, I'm not going to give you some philosophical uh, college professor theory on why there's police brutality and what to do about it. I'm going to give you firsthand experience from a kid who grew up in the cities of Irvington and Newark, New Jersey, who experienced police brutality. And I'm going to give you my opinion, what needs to be done. I'm going to give you real solutions. But first, you notice I always wear this hat with an American flag and a blue line that supports the police. I back the blue. And my son-in-law gave me this hat. My son-in-law happens to be a good cop, a very good cop. And a lot of my friends are retired cops, and they were all very good cops. And I can promise you this, no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop, because one bad cop puts a bullseye on every good cop's back. So when we're talking about police brutality, we're talking about a small percentage. There's bad people in every profession. There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad teachers, and there's unfortunately some bad cops. And these were the worst of the worst we've seen with Tyre Nichols recently. That was heart-wrenching to watch. And as a father, when I heard him calling out to his mother, it brought tears in my eyes. Because that could have very easily been my son. My son's a good kid, but he had a wise mouth. He got in trouble with the law as a teenager. He got in trouble with school, and it was always his wise. He was a wise guy. And it was always a smart aleck. By the grace of God, he became a criminal defense lawyer, and loves the Lord, is involved in his church, and uses his smart aleckly personality for good now. But to watch that man get brutally beaten like he did is just heart-wrenching. Now, what I said in the past was police brutality is real, and it has nothing to do with racism. But even if we demonstrate this and prove this to the left, the Democrats will still call it racism. And that's what we see now. 5 black cops killed an innocent, hardworking, blue-collar guy. And the left is still calling it racism. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But how do I know this guy was a hard-working, blue-collar guy? Because he was a FedEx driver. And I know FedEx drivers. These guys work 60, 70 hours a week, running and gunning all day long. And he had a part-time job on top of that as a photographer. So I know this guy was a hard-working guy. And I doubt that he was even driving recklessly, because he had to have a CDL to be a FedEx driver. So I think that's bull crap too. But I'll tell you in a minute why I think he ran. But I know police brutality firsthand. I remember being a kid, getting pulled over by the cops in Irvington, and they asked me my name, and I said Robert. They asked me my last name, and I said Plant. Before I could say Stairway to Heaven, I had a nightstick in my groin. No bruises, but it was the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. I had a cousin, I told you about my cousin Richie, blonde hair and blue eyes, 21 years old. The Irvington cops knocked out all his teeth. He had to get dentures, 22. And this kid was, the girls thought my cousin was gorgeous. He was a singer in a band. He still sings. He's like in his 60s, and he does like Frankie Valli to a T. But false teeth, I had a good friend, an Irish kid, lived in the projects in Irvington, and he actually became my brother-in-law. And he had some Quaaludes in his pockets, and he ran from the cops. And they took him. What they do when you run from cops, and this is one thing I learned, is if you run from a cop, don't get caught, because they get pissed. And they caught him, brought him to Irvington Park, a dark, very dark park. And they beat him so bad, they knocked out one of his teeth. And he told me he was bleeding every time he peed for weeks. So I know police brutality is real. And it's not a racial thing. It's just a bad cop thing. And unfortunately, Irvington and Newark had a lot of bad cops. It was so bad that George Bush, a president who supported law enforcement, had to have his attorney general take over those 2 departments back in the early 2000s, I guess. like 20 years ago, because they were so corrupt. And when I had first moved down here to Florida, I was talking to the chief of police. He's long since retired, chief of the police from my little town, and he recognized my accent. And I told him where I was from. He's like, "Oh my goodness." He said, I do seminars. He was a chief of police from Miami, and then he wanted to retire in my little town, so he came up here and did like 3 years as chief of police in my little town in Central Florida. But he said one of the things he does is he goes around the country to talk about ethics and police ethics. And he said he went to Newark and Irvington, and he was appalled. He said, "I've never seen such a corrupt force." He said, "It's scary." He said, "It was scary how these guys have such disregard for the law." And I said, "Yeah, I know. We used to say they were the blue mafia up there, And, but again, down here, I know a lot of cops, retired cops. It's different. There's just pockets in the country where there's some bad cops. It's real. And they do bad things, and they need to be punished, but it has nothing to do with race. But the Democrats will always make it race. It was 5 black cops, and the Democrats are still saying it's due to systemic racism. Why do they do this? Because Democrats never want to solve the problem. They always want an issue. They want a wedge issue to put us against each other. They want to make us angry. They want to get their people out there voting for them. And then they're in collusion with the race baiters that make money. The profiteers from this, like, Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. It's well known that they blackmailed Burger King and McDonald's and said if they didn't donate millions of dollars, they were going to protest and picket them. So it's a big industry, Racism is a big industry, and then, keeps the Democrats in power, keeps them an issue they don't want to solve. So as a guy who's experienced it and knows good cops, and like I said, most cops are good cops. And what would I do to change it? Number one, accountability. When I was in the military, they were so strict on drug abuse. I mean, I got a random drug test every month. I was in 4 years, I must have had 50 drug tests. At first, they watch you, they're looking right at you. You can't do it in private. They watch you. And at first it was kind of weird, It took me a couple hours to pee in a cup. After a dozen times, it was like, yeah, just whip it out and go. I don't care who, there'd be 10 chiefs in there watching me. You didn't care at that point. You just got so used to it. But they were so strict because in the 60s and 70s, drug abuse was rampant in the Navy. And then I think it was, I think it's the USS Enterprise. It was a huge fire. Sailors got killed. Millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of jets had to be pushed off the ship because there was a big explosion. And it turned out it was a guy that was supposed to be doing something, but he was so high he forgot. And he caused a lot of damage, death, and injuries. So after that, they're like, okay, 0 tolerance for drug abuse. So now, if you're an E1 to E3 and you fail a drug test, I think you get 2 months restriction. You couldn't leave the barracks. You got bumped down to E1. I mean, it's pretty harsh punishment. But if you were an E4, which, a petty officer, you're supposed to be an NCO, a supervisor, E4 or higher, you were thrown out. No questions asked. You were out. You're out. No questions asked. So, in the police force, everybody needs, it should be a no-brainer. Everybody has to have those cameras on. And if you see, never mind someone dying, every police encounter should be reviewed. And if you see someone who gets hit, or once a person is restrained, like Tyre Nichols was restrained, and these guys are still pounding on him. Once someone's restrained and they're handcuffed and they're not moving and they're not fighting back, if someone strikes them, that supervisor should be thrown out first, and then everybody else punished accordingly. Even if it's not the supervisor doing the hitting, so that supervisor knows his job is on the line with every police encounter. It's like in the Navy. I remember there was a storm in Cuba, and the captain of the ship was on land, so the XO of the ship had the ship moved, because you got to get away from the dock when there's a storm. And, he had an enlisted guy actually doing the driving. The captains don't actually do the driving, just, an enlisted guy like quartermaster or somebody doing the driving. And that kid hit another ship. Guess who got relieved of his command, thrown out of the Navy? The captain on land, because he was responsible for that ship. So what I'm saying is, if there's an incident and someone strikes an individual who's restrained, the highest ranking guy, because, you know, there's always like 5 or 6 cops on the scene. Who's ever the highest ranking should get the most severe punishment. Everybody should get punished. But even if that guy didn't hit it, he gets relieved. And I'm telling you, when people's jobs are on the line, they're going to make sure they do the right thing. That's number one. But number two, we got to change people's hearts. You know, we need conversion. And how do we do this? Okay, you know, my son-in-law, again, is a cop. He tells me that our priest, Father Derek, always appears on the scene. He said, yeah, there was an accident by the church the other day, and Father Derek comes out and says, hey, can I pray for you guys? And he prays. And then another day, he's like, yeah, I've seen Father Derek again. They had a mentally ill guy running around. His family was trying to get him in the car, and we're trying to talk to him, and Father Derek came out and said, hey, can I pray for you guys? And he said he just like diffused the whole situation. It was peaceful, and we were able to calmly get the guy back in the car with his family. And I said, yeah, Father Derek is like Padre Pio. He always appears. He's got his collar on, and he always just appears where he's needed to be. And so I would encourage priests to get involved in the community, get involved with these police officers. These cops all know Father Derek, and they love him, you know. And not only that, my deacon, I have a solid deacon, Deacon John, and he preaches the uncompromised word of God. He's a solid Catholic, and he preaches orthodoxy. And he's a chaplain on our local police force, you know. So we need more men like that involved, talking to these guys, you know. And I'm gonna do a couple videos, Lord willing, this weekend on conversion, you know. When you're a Christian, when you come to Christ, he converts your heart, you know. He replaces the law with your heart. He puts the law of God in the heart. We're not rule followers. We're transformed. Jesus said, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, I'll abide in you. We got to convert these people. These cops need conversion, you know. We can't just give them like a list of rules. We got to give them a new, you know, lead them to Christ. And it can be done, you know. A few years back, my son's sister-in-law was 18 years old, and she went missing. She was missing for like 3 days, and we were frantically looking all over for her. And then one night, I got the worst call of my life. My son called me, and he said, I found her. She's dead. She was in a car crash. She was going like 100 miles an hour around a curve. And he said, the cops are holding me here while they, you know, look around and stuff. Please get back and, you know, tell my wife, you know, I want you to be with my wife before the cops go there and break the news to her. My daughter-in-law was like 8 months pregnant, so I rushed over there, and it was too late. The cops already got there and told her, and she's just on the ground wailing. I went there to be their strength, and there was no strength. You know, I was wailing, you know, I was crying too. And then her mom was crying, my baby, my baby. And this was a family of faith. They're crying out to the Lord, you know, why, Jesus? Why, Lord? Why? And it was just the most horrific scene. And but there was a sheriff. It was the sheriff's department that was there, and there was a sheriff chaplain that came over, and he was a comfort to everybody. You know, I think he was a Protestant pastor, but he was there. You know, and his presence brought some sense of peace. You know, and reminded us, you know, that God is in control, and it was a good thing. And I just want to encourage more deacons and pastors to become chaplains on the police force. And we need you there for the grieving, like that chaplain was there that night. It was like, you know, it was like midnight, and we stayed till early in the morning. That chaplain stayed there the whole time, you know. And then the cops were, you know, the cops were good too, but they didn't know what to say or do. They just stood there quietly, you know, and just answered our questions we had. But we need more chaplains to convert, you know, not, you know, be there for the grieving, but also minister to these cops, you know. The harvest is great, you know, the workers are few. We need to pray that the Lord sends more into the harvest. So if you're a pastor or a deacon, I urge you to get involved with your local police department. And, you know, these cops see a lot of bad things, you know. And again, I'm not here to bash the cops. There's 10 million arrests a year throughout the country. And you see very few of these horrible killings, you know. And it seems like a lot because of the internet and 24-hour news and the left-wing media, and the Democrats want us to hate cops and defund cops. But according to Richard Fryer, a Harvard professor who happens to be a liberal and happens to be an African American, he did a study, and he said he was surprised to find, he thought he was going to find racism, systemic racism, and this is a liberal, and he said he didn't. He found, in fact, his study showed him that cops are more hesitant to shoot black people. And I think this was in 2021. I don't know what the stats are this year, you know, or 2022, but 2021, it was like 9 unarmed black men were killed by cops and like 18 unarmed white men were killed by cops. And he said that they're more hesitant to shoot black people because, you know, the media, you know, was always calling them out as racist. And I can attest to all the cops I know, they're like very hesitant when they're dealing with an African American. They don't want to be called a racist, and sometimes they hesitate and it costs their lives. In fact, the most dangerous color to be in an altercation is blue. Last year, 72 cops were killed. 72 cops were killed in the line of duty, you know, and these cops will tell you it's because the Democrats and the left-wing media just paints them out to be so evil that no one respects them anymore. Everybody hates them. You know, this is why when Trump ran against Biden, it was like the first time in history that every single police union in the country backed one party, and that was Donald Trump. Usually, like, you know, the blue states, New York and California, they'll back the Democrat, you know. But no, New York City police backed Donald Trump. LA police, San Francisco police, Portland, Oregon police, every single police department backed Donald Trump. So this is another thing. We have to support politicians that support our police, because what the left wants is the exact opposite, is what to make cops better. They want to defund the police. You've seen all these, you know, defund, and then they take away like billions of dollars of their funding. So that's less training. In Atlanta, you know, Black Lives Matter and Antifa were protesting. They were building a new training facility, and they said they were trying to protect some park, and they had this big riot. This just happened like a week ago. And I think they killed a cop, and they went into churches and threatened people that were involved in this building process. And they were building a training facility to give these cops more training. These cops need more training so they can be better cops. And, you know, with all due respect to my police officer friends, I was kind of disappointed when I seen my son. I went to my son-in-law's graduation years ago when he graduated from the academy. And I seen him marching up to get their graduation papers. And none of them were marching in step. They're all out of step. They're all laughing. I was like, this is so undisciplined. I was expecting like a military graduation, and it was not military. And I said to my son-in-law, I said, dude, you guys didn't even march in step. He goes, yeah, they tried to get us to march in step, but we couldn't do it. I'm like, you couldn't do it? It's called discipline. When I was in boot camp, if we didn't march in step, we'd be out there at 2 o'clock in the morning until we got it right. So I think these cops need more discipline in their academy. They need better training. Honestly, I was really disappointed to see how undisciplined these cops are. So they need more money to be better trained, and we need more cops, not less cops. You know, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York City, I seen it firsthand. Whether you like his politics or not, I seen it firsthand. New York City was transformed from the most dangerous city in the world to the safest city in the world. And Giuliani said when he would get called from black grandmothers complaining about crime in the neighborhood, they weren't saying we got too many cops. They were complaining there wasn't enough cops. They were like saying, Mayor, you need to send more cops to my neighborhood. It's unsafe for my grandchildren. So we got to fight, you know, we got to fight on a political level and support Republicans. I mean, just like, you know, Republicans are pro-life, they're pro-cops. I mean, there's, you know, people say, oh, don't talk politics, but it's reality. The Democrats want to defund cops because that's all part of their agenda. They don't want to solve the problem, just like they don't want to solve the problem on the border. They never want to solve problems. They always want problems. They always want chaos. This is how they get elected. They just talk about it, and then the race baiters make money off of it. So, but the bottom line, the most important thing is conversion. You know, if you have a cop friend, lead them to Jesus. You know, if you're a chaplain, get more involved with these cops. So anyway, that's just my opinion. Blue collar guy that, you know, grew up on the streets and seen it firsthand. God bless, stay Catholic. And, you know, the most innocent people are the unborn. And, you know, until we can convert every heart in America to realize that life is sacred, we need to support companies that believe life is sacred. So if you're buying or selling real estate, like always, go to realestateforlife.org. God bless and stay Catholic.